Hey folks, it's Lucy at Ballyhoo Creations, and in today's video I'm going to tell you 9 tips and tricks to level up your in-the-hoop projects. This is where we use our embroidery machine and turn it into a sewing robot. So it's like using your embroidery machine to do a small sewing pattern. You can't do really big things because your hoops aren't big enough, but we can do small projects like bags, plushies. I do puppets in the hoop. You can do key fobs, earrings, all kinds of things like that. Usually in the hoop means that you're going to be making seams on something, not just doing a surface design where you put one design on top of your fabric on a shirt, a hat, or whatever. That's the surface design where you're embellishing. In the hoop is where you're actually using your embroidery machine to act like a sewing machine to automatically stitch things for you. It's really cool. It's my favorite thing to do with embroidery machines. I've been doing it for, gosh, 15 years now. Before it was even a thing, before in the hoop was even a term. By the way, I do not like the term in the hoop. I think that it's very confusing because all machine embroidery is done in a hoop. And so everybody thinks that in the hoop means you're just doing any kind of machine embroidery. And that's not really what the term means. But I agree, it's completely confusing. I wish it would go away. But that's what the industry's calling it. I prefer the term robotic sewing because that's really what it's doing. But yeah, my opinion hasn't caught on yet, so. All right, so now you know what in the hoop is. You might be interested in doing some yourself. I even have a free design, this little sock monster that you can make with a sock, or you could do it with a different kind of fabric. And this is a free design that I will give you. It's linked down in the description box if you just want to try out in the hoop and see how to make something like this, because your embroidery machine stitches the eyes and the mouth. And then the limbs, all the seams are done by your machine as well. I also added a little sweater. This is just a sock, man. This is just the top of a sock. I mean, that's how easy it is. I glued a little fur on top. You don't have to, but you get my point. So there's a little free project for you if you want to try something. You don't really want to spend the money on a design yet. You just want to see like how this works. Go and grab that little sock monster. Play around. Okay, tip number 1 is read the instructions. I know some of you are like, seriously, that's your first tip, but you'd be surprised at how many people, when they're new at In the Hoop projects, they don't understand that there is an entire PDF set of instructions, usually with color photos. Some digitizers like me do a video tutorial as well. So I have seen people try to stitch in the hoop projects just going by the color sheet that just says, like, here's the 6 colors, do it in this order. And that's really not enough most of the time to do an in the hoop project. This is like a sewing pattern with instructions and hopefully photos to help you really walk through and do things. So just the color sheet or the order of stitches usually isn't enough. So make sure that you go and find that PDF instruction document. It's usually in the zip file where all the other files are included. Make sure that you're following that and don't just blindly jump in with, oh, I've got 6 colors, I'm not sure what to do. You need more. There are some simpler things like maybe felties and stuff, you wouldn't need that, but most of the time you'll want some instructions. Tip number 2 is get your tensions right. Should you mess with your tension on your machine or not? And the real truth of this is, I'm so like, I can't tell you how many times I've just, I don't agree with people on this, because whether or not you have to adjust your tension depends on your machine. And a lot of the people who do in the hoop projects, they have bigger machines, more expensive machines that automatically adjust their tension. And they say, I don't ever have to adjust my tension at all. Everything works perfectly for me. Well, yes, because you spent a lot of money on your machine and you may not think it's an expensive machine, but trust me, compared to the $350 brother that's sold at Walmart, your machine is very expensive compared to that one. If your machine has a tension dial where you have to adjust the tension setting, then that probably means that that is a manual tension adjustment. The machine's not doing any computerized tension adjustments. You have to manually set that dial. And when you're stitching your seams, if you leave that tension at a low number like 2, 3, 4, your seams may not be tight enough. You're going to have loose, floppy seams. You might even be able to see the stuffing inside. That's bad. You want a nice tight seam just like your sewing machine would give you. And the way that you do that is on some machines, don't do anything because the machine adjusts the tension for you. But on other machines, that like the one with the tension dial I was just showing the Poolin, a lot of the Brother, the 500, the 600 series, even the 7 and 800, and I'm not sure about the 900, I think even the new 900 series. You have to adjust that dial to get the tension right for your seams. Otherwise, it's going to be too loose and you're going to be able to see inside those seams. It's not it's not a quality seam. So get your tension right. I do have a tension design test that you can download for free. Again, that's on my SuperPeer, same place as that little sock monster. And you can see the different running stitches and how tight they are when you change your tension dial. So try that out if you are having problems with seams. If you try an in the hoop project and your seams are beautiful and tight, you don't have to do anything at all. You only have to mess with it if you have a machine that has, you know, the manual adjustment. Some machines will adjust automatically depending on if it's a running stitch, a satin stitch, a fill stitch, and that will usually be good enough. For a lot of machines, that's enough. Some machines have more advanced tension adjustment, like on my multi-needle machine over here. I don't have to touch anything. It perfectly stitches a satin stitch or running stitch with the correct tension no matter what. So that one works great. I never have to touch it. I have a Viking that I do have to manually adjust, even though brand new, that was a $10,000 machine and it has computerized tension, but I still have to manually adjust it for in the hoop projects because that wasn't even a thing back then. And again, with the pool in it has the little dial, and I have to bump that up to like 5 or 6 when I do an in the hoop seam. So now you know, if you're having problems with your seams, you are going to have to manually adjust your tension. Ignore what everybody else on Facebook groups and bulletin boards say because they have a different machine than you and maybe they don't have to mess with it, but some people do. When you're dealing with your tensions, another thing I should point out is if you get these stitches where the top thread is so loose and then this is the bobbin thread it's clinging onto, and these are called eyelashes, or eyelashing is what we call this, and you can barely see. Like on the front side, it doesn't look that bad. I've got loose stitches here because I was playing with the tension. I did a tighter tension here, I loosened it up, and you can see how loose that is, and then I tightened it back up again, but you can still see the eyelashing. On a seam, this would be horrible. This seam would come apart. You don't want that. But when you're just doing the placement stitches, which are usually much longer stitches, you're going to have a looser tension anyway. Don't worry about eyelashing on your placement stitches. Just make sure that you get it nice and tight for your seams. That's really where it's important, not so much on the placement, which it's more common because of those long stitch lengths. Tip number 3 is use the proper stabilizer. I've got 2 different hoops sitting here, and in one hoop I have a tearaway stabilizer, in the other I have a cutaway, and you can see these are very thin see-through stabilizers. If I'm using a tearaway and I'm not doing heavy embroidery, I like to use the Sulky Tear-Ez. It's a very lightweight tearaway stabilizer that comes off of your seams very, very easily. So if you're doing something that doesn't have a lot of surface design, you can use that. Even if there is a lot of surface design, sometimes you can just put a piece of cutaway under where the design is to stabilize that, and then leave the rest of the hoop stabilizer as this light tearaway, and it comes off of your seams beautifully. It doesn't pull your stitches out. If you're doing something where you want a cutaway, a no-show mesh cutaway stabilizer is great for that because it's very thin and it's not very bulky. If you use a medium cutaway for an in the hoop project, a lot of times what happens is it just adds a lot of bulk and it's harder to turn things right side out. So if you're having problems with that, with either your stitches being pulled out when you remove your tearaway, or it's hard to turn things right side out, try the no-show mesh cutaway, or try the Sulky Tear-Ez. It's a tearaway. Again, this one's cutaway mesh. This one's tearaway. Got that straight. Okay. Okay, tip number 4 is what I call plowing. I don't know if there's an actual technical term for this, so I'm just going to make up a word, and it's plowing, because this is when your machine plows over your fabric and moves it around like a snowplow moves snow out of the way. Your machine's presser foot can do that with your fabric, and it's incredibly frustrating because when you're doing in the hoop projects, the placement of the fabric is very important, and if your machine just goes and shoves it out of the way, everything can get screwed up. So there's 3 different things I'm going to recommend to you on this plowing. Number 4 is plowing. 1 is to use tape. I'll talk more about that. 1 is to use a stylus, never ever your fingers. And then the 3rd thing is to raise your presser foot if you can, and I'll really get into that a little bit more. When I say use tape, you can tape things down into your hoop and keep them from moving around. Be very careful about stitching through tape. All tape is not made the same. Some people like to use painter's tape to hold things in place. Some people like this, this clear tape. It's called Transpore by 3M. and it's a clear. It tears easily, but I do find this is gumming up my needle. I'm actually working on an entire video that's about different tapes and whether they gum up your needle, how well they hold. So stay tuned for that. That'll come later. But a lot of people do like painter's tape, the 3M medical tape, also paper tape. This one's Kimberbell. There are a couple of other brands that sell embroidery machine tape for taping things in the hoop. And this is just a paper tape. It's very sticky. So those are different options. I'm not recommending that you stitch through any of these until after I finish all the testing that I'm working on for the tape video that I mentioned. But at least for holding fabrics down and not getting stitched through, any of these tapes will work. Another way to help with things shifting around is to use a stylus or a pointing tool to hold things in place while your machine is stitching. Never ever use your fingers. That is a good way to get a quick trip to the emergency room. Horrible thing to do. Always use a tool for that. I've got a couple of different tools that people like to use. Some people just use a cheap little, this is called an orange stick that's used for manicuring your nails. Go look in the beauty department and get you a package of orange sticks. They're super cheap, like you wouldn't nail. But having the nice pointy tip is good. This one's too short for me. I don't like it. The purple thing is one that a lot of people will use because they can buy these in the sewing machine shop, and it does other things besides hold things down. But because of that little hook on the end, you can grab the thread from under your needle. So that's a decent one. A lot of people use the tweezers. Usually your machine comes with this, so you could use tweezers. My very favorite, though, is something called a spring hook, and I will link to this on Amazon. It's less than $5 for this, and it's very long. So even for my multi-needle, I can put this into the hoop, and my fingers are nowhere near the needle. One end has a pusher end, and that is great for threading your machine because of the little thread hooks in there, and you can push it in. And then the other end is a little hook, which you can grab your threads to or kind of pull something out of the way. So I do love this. This is my favorite, and I wish everybody had one of these tools. I preach about it all the time. I'll link to on Amazon, and yeah, it'll be an affiliate link, but it's $4. I mean, great tool. So any of these will work. Just don't use these. Don't use your fingers. Make sure that you use a tool when you're holding things down and trying to keep things in place. And probably the most important thing that you can do to prevent that plowing and fabrics moving around from your presser foot is to raise the presser foot of your machine. This might not be something your machine can do. Some machines can raise the presser foot while you're embroidering. Some of them can't. And then my advice, because this is what worked best for me, if you have the money and you're looking at a multi-needle machine, upgrade to a multi-needle, because they have a 1-inch clearance between the hoop and the presser foot. It's almost an inch under there, and so that's a lot of bulky fabric that you can get under there, whereas other machines have much less room. Let's measure and see. On the multi-needle, I had a whole like 1 1/3 inches. That was for the multi-needle with a really high clearance. On a single needle, I got about 1/3 of an inch, or about 10 millimeters, 1 centimeter here. So you can see that's a big difference from this much clearance to that much clearance. I mean, that's a big difference. I realize most of you can't just go out and buy a multi-needle just to do in the hoop projects, but if you are considering like which machine to upgrade to and you do a lot of in the hoop projects, that is something to consider, because I didn't know that that was even a feature. Nobody talks about that until I bought the multi-needle and started using it, and it was a total game changer for in the hoop, because every time the needle moves around, it lifts that presser foot up and then moves, and there's no plowing. So best way to fix it, spend a lot of money. Okay, I'm just kidding, because the tape and, taping things down and using the stylus to hold things down, those things work too. Tip number 5 is floating your fabric. Floating means that you're actually just hooping the stabilizer, and then you're placing your fabrics or vinyl or whatever on top of that stabilizer. So you're not actually hooping the fabric that you're stitching on, just the stabilizer gets hooped. And the reason that that is a big problem for a lot of people is that the stabilizers are thin and they can slip through the hoop, and then things get out of place. Here's how you fix that. I've got 2 different hoops here just to show you. This is the Tear-Away stabilizer, very thin, that I talked about, also the no-show mesh. You're usually going to use a thin stabilizer when you're doing in the hoop projects. And you just can't get the hoops tight enough. No matter what you do, the hoops typically are not made to hold something this thin tightly. So you can do the pin trick. And that's where you take a pin that has a really large head like this T-pin here, and then you put it not in the hoop here, but you put it right in between where these two hoops meet. You pin through the stabilizer only right at that point. And then the head of the pin then keeps the stabilizer from slipping through, and that will hold your stabilizer firmly. If you have a small hoop, this is a 4x4, you could just do two pins on the side. If you have a larger hoop, you may need to do, you know, a few more. I'd say every 3 or 4 inches, go ahead and put a pin, and that'll really get your stabilizer tight. Another thing that you can use is something called a hoop tape or a grippy tape, something that I've actually got some residue left here on the side here, and that will make your stabilizer stick to it. And you can use this over and over again. It just makes your hoop sticky with the double-sided tape. And then when you hoop it, and you still got to tighten things up, but your stabilizer, because of that stickiness, it won't slip because it's stuck in there. So you could either use a double-sided tape to hold your stabilizer in place or use the pin trick. Either of those work. I've also got some yellow grippy tape. You could try that in between the two pieces of your hoop. Put that little yellow grippy tape, that can work too. But so those are the two different options for floating and keeping things from moving around and not letting your stabilizer slip out of the hoop and throw your placement stitches off. Another trick that I'll share when you're floating and you need to put some fabric in the hoop and you don't want it to move, but you don't want to tape all around it, you can also use either a temporary adhesive, or I like to use just a glue stick like an Elmer's, or this one's from Dollar Tree, just a little bit of glue in there, and then put your fabric, or vinyl is really good for this trick, and then it's not going to move around so much either. That's another way to keep things from shifting. Just a glue stick while you're floating. Tip number 6 is about the thread we use. You may be wondering what kind of thread to use in your In the Hoop project, because if you were using a sewing machine, you would use an all-purpose thread, and then you would load a bobbin with the matching thread, and you would use the same color in the top and bobbin for sewing seams, and that's not necessary when we're doing In the Hoop, because the fact is our polyester embroidery threads are stronger than the regular all-purpose sewing threads. So it's okay to use your embroidery thread. It's also okay to use your pre-wound bobbin as long as the color doesn't bother you, because the bobbin thread is really strong and you'll get a nice strong seam with this. If you're having problems with the tension of your seam, you might want to go ahead and use a heavier thread for your bobbin, but that's not necessary if you adjust your tension. And then again, just the polyester embroidery thread and our regular bobbin is fine for seams. You will get a strong seam as long as you adjust the tension like I mentioned earlier. I wouldn't recommend using specialty threads or rayon thread. Tip number 7 is specifically about vinyl, because a lot of In the Hoop projects use vinyl, whether it's a key fob, maybe a little bag made with vinyl, coasters. You can do all of those with your embroidery machine in the hoop, but vinyl can be tricky. So the first tip with vinyl is to use a 7511 needle that's a sharp, not an embroidery needle. The sharp has a finer tip on it and will leave smaller holes in your vinyl or leather than the embroidery needle will. So use a 7511 sharp. You might even get away with, what is it, 6010? One size down from the 7511. The other tip with vinyl is sometimes when you're putting vinyl on the bottom of your hoop, so this is the top part where the stitching happens, but then underneath you might be putting another piece of vinyl on the bottom to finish off the back side of something, and that vinyl can stick to the bed of your embroidery machine and cause the stitching to not go where it's supposed to. So the way that you can deal with that, when you're putting things on the back side of your hoop, you can use a topper, like your water-soluble or heat-soluble topper, just that clear film that you use, and tape that, and then that way this will glide over your machine. And of course you want to tape all the corners and keep that in place, but this is slippery, whereas this might catch on the bed of your machine. Depends on your machine too. Some of them are better than others. And tip 8 has to do with when you're working on the back of your hoop like I was just doing on that last one. Your stabilizer can get loose when you're doing this, even if you've pinned it or sticky stuff. While you're doing all of this stuff on the back of the hoop, it can loosen this stabilizer and throw your stitches out of whack. So you can get pads, and I don't have these myself yet, but I'm eyeing them from Designs and Machine Embroidery or Dime. I'll put that up on the screen here. And those pads go underneath your hoop, and give you a nice firm surface. So if you have to press things down and like tape things, or if you're ironing on the back of the hoop, you can do all of that much easier with those pads, and they come in different sizes to fit different hoops. Man, I really like those pads. I need to get me some of those. I don't have them yet. And the last tip that I have to share is number 9. I just mentioned ironing, and yes, when you're doing in the hoop projects, especially bags, ironing is a thing, and you have to iron and press while things are still in the hoop. And where do you get an iron to fit? There's a couple that I'll show you. So I've got 2 different irons here that you can use, and they'll fit in your hoop. One is just a little mini iron that I got on Amazon, and this one has actually been recalled, but I'll find this and link to it. And then the better one that I like is the Oliso. This one gets hotter and it's heavier, so it presses much better. However, the Oliso is too big for, this is a Viking 4x4 hoop. It does fit in the Poolin 4x4 hoop. I just noticed that. It's pretty cool because of this being such a short hoop. It does fit. And then this little one on Amazon, it fits in all of the hoops that I have, actually. Those are all the tips and tricks that I have. If you have more tips and tricks for in the hoop or robotic sewing that I missed, please leave a comment and share that knowledge with others. The more we know, the better we all get. If you want to practice your in the hoop sewing, you can go and get this free little sock monster project that I put out on my SuperPeer site. Just follow me on SuperPeer and you can get this project. There's a 5x7 size and a 4x9 size, and there is no 4x4. That I should have mentioned this as well. 4x4, some digitizers will give you a 4x4 design, but it's so small and it's so fussy to work in those small hoops that it's actually much harder. It's like the difference between making a full-size doll or a miniature doll that's very detailed. It's harder when you go smaller. So I oftentimes don't even do the small 4x4 designs for some things because it's just too hard. But anyway, go grab this design. It's really fun. Also over there on SuperPeer, you can schedule a one-on-one video chat with me if you're having problems with in the hoop, with your machine embroidery. If you're wanting to figure out what machine would maybe be best for you, I have different calls that you can schedule with me over there. And eventually I plan on doing some live streams over there as well. So that should be a lot of fun. For everything else that I've talked about in this video, go check the description box. I've got links down there. That is all I have for right now. I will see you later, folks. And also number 5 is, what is number 5? There's not a number 5. Okay, so I just did the outro a couple of times and was paused. Yay! Yay! Go me! I don't even remember what I was saying.